He was a man who couldn't find an English woman who caught up with his depressions, his paranoia, his lack of intellect, to be very crude about it. And Meghan gave him a safety net.
It was supposed to be one of the rare evenings when titles, cameras, and royal protocol were left outside the door. But within minutes, the private family gathering turned painfully personal. Prince Harry confronted Catherine directly over what he believed had happened during years of family division, and William watched the exchange become sharper with every sentence. Then his patience broke. He stepped between his wife and brother and made it unmistakably clear that the confrontation was over. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had encouraged the gathering because he believed the family needed one evening without advisors, statements, or palace protocol. That protocol, the formal rules and customs governing royal behavior, usually kept difficult emotions hidden behind careful manners. Tonight, the king wanted something simpler. William, Catherine, and Harry were meant to sit together as family, speak plainly, and perhaps soften years of bitterness. Instead, the absence of official barriers gave old resentment room to surface. Harry had carried one unresolved grievance into the room, and when the conversation moved toward the years of separation, he turned directly to Catherine. The Duke asked why certain private conversations had ended the way they had, and pressed her to acknowledge choices he believed deepened the divide between the Sussexes and the Wales family. Catherine answered quietly at first. She kept her voice steady, but the questions continued, and restraint began hardening into hurt. Catherine finally placed her glass down and told him there were accusations she would no longer absorb, simply to preserve peace. Harry pushed back, insisting he wanted honesty, not blame. William said nothing at first. He watched his wife choose every word carefully, watched his brother interrupt, and watched the discussion become something far more personal. Then the prince rose. William stepped between them and told Harry, with controlled fury, that Catherine would not be treated as a target. The future king did not shout, but the force in his voice stopped the room cold. Harry stared back, defensive, while Catherine remained seated, shaken by how quickly the evening had collapsed. Charles understood that his attempt at reconciliation had failed. The monarch stayed silent, until William made the boundary unmistakable. Certain lines had been crossed, and they would not be crossed again. Harry's reaction revealed that this argument had never truly begun that night. One conversation from years earlier still burned beneath everything he had said, and to understand why William reacted with such force, the story must first turn away from that explosive room, and toward the three people who walked into it carrying very different wounds. William saw a husband's duty. Harry saw years of unanswered hurt. Catherine saw herself being pulled back into a family conflict she had spent years trying to survive quietly. That was what made the confrontation so dangerous. Nobody entered the room believing they were the aggressor. Each believed they were protecting something precious. And when people feel cornered by history, even the smallest sentence can sound like an attack. William had become fiercely protective of Catherine after years of public pressure. Criticism from outside the family was painful enough. A direct challenge inside a private gathering felt different. To the prince, this evening was supposed to be safe ground, where his wife would not have to defend herself. Harry entered with the opposite instinct. He believed silence had done enough damage, especially after years in which courtiers, staff members who assist senior royals and manage official matters, had stood between difficult conversations. Catherine felt the danger before dinner began. She asked William whether the evening could remain calm. He touched her arm and asked whether she wanted to leave early. She shook her head. Avoiding difficult people forever, she told him, could not become the family's solution. William reassured her, but the promise carried strain. He wanted peace. She wanted dignity. Quiet tension lingered. Neither could control what Harry had brought into the room. Harry noticed the caution immediately. William's politeness felt guarded, and the Duke interpreted that distance as rejection. When Catherine answered one question carefully, he heard diplomacy rather than restraint. She was trying not to inflame the situation. He believed she was avoiding the truth. The brothers no longer understood silence the same way. William saw restraint as protection from another rupture. Harry saw the same restraint as proof that the hardest subjects were still being buried. Catherine's expression changed when Harry finally said, What happened before everything changed? She stopped speaking for several seconds. William noticed. The future king did not need an explanation, because he understood which memory had entered the room. Harry understood it too. The argument was no longer about general distance, or years of cold communication. It had narrowed to one private exchange that both Catherine and the Duke had carried differently ever since. That silence became the real warning. William watched his wife retreat into memory, while Harry leaned closer to the grievance he had never released. Catherine knew exactly where the conversation was heading, and the prince realized the evening had crossed from uncomfortable into dangerous. Because Harry's anger did not begin at this gathering. In his mind, it began on one earlier evening, when a private conversation ended with a door closing and a relationship quietly changing forever. Every family rupture has a moment that looks insignificant until years later. For Harry and Catherine, that moment came after a family occasion when the guests had gone, the smiles had disappeared, and only a few relatives remained behind closed doors. Harry asked Catherine for help repairing tensions with William. What followed lasted less than 20 minutes. Yet in Harry's memory, that conversation became the moment he stopped believing reconciliation could happen naturally. Harry had once trusted Catherine in a way that made the later distance sting more deeply. Their relationship had been warmer and less guarded, which was why the Duke believed she could still reach William when others could not. Family tensions were hardening. Windsor had become more than a residence that evening. It was the royal estate where the family had gathered privately after an official occasion, and Harry saw one final chance to speak without aids or public pressure. Catherine understood. After dinner, Harry asked her alone to persuade William to reopen direct communication with him. He argued that his brother would listen to her, when he would not listen to anyone else. She refused. Catherine told him she would not carry messages between the brothers, and she would not pressure her husband into a conversation he was not ready to have. Harry tightened. Harry asked whether she believed he deserved to be shut out. Catherine answered that it was not about punishment or loyalty. It was about boundaries. She had felt the cost of standing between two brothers who no longer trusted each other, and knew any message could become another source of blame. The Duke heard something different. To him, her refusal sounded like a choice, and he left believing she had chosen William over whatever bond remained between them. Catherine remembered the part Harry seemed to forget. Before he walked away, she offered one alternative. She would sit down with both brothers if they both agreed to speak directly. Harry dismissed the idea in frustration, convinced William would never accept. Later, she told the prince what had happened. He was disturbed that his wife had been placed in the middle, and promised her privately that she would never again be required to mediate their conflict. Catherine stayed where she was, as Harry reached the doorway. "I cannot fix this for either of you," she told him quietly. He paused, looked back, and left without answering. Years later, that unfinished exchange returned with frightening precision. So when Harry raised that same grievance again, William was not witnessing a new disagreement. He was watching an old boundary being crossed for the second time, and this time, he refused to remain seated. The room changed the moment William stood up. Until then, the confrontation had belonged to Harry and Catherine. Painful, personal, but still contained. William's movement transformed it into something else. His chair moved sharply against the floor. Catherine stopped speaking. Harry turned toward him, and in the silence that followed, years of resentment between two brothers suddenly became impossible to hide behind. Courtesy, distance, or royal protocol. Harry returned to the old Windsor grievance with growing force. He told Catherine that her refusal to intervene years earlier had confirmed something he already feared, that William's side of the family had decided exactly where loyalty belonged. She rejected that immediately. Catherine insisted she had not chosen one brother over another. She had refused to become their intermediary, meaning the person expected to carry messages and negotiate between two sides in conflict. To her, that boundary had been self-protection. To Harry, it had felt like abandonment. William forced himself to remain seated at first. The prince knew Catherine could answer for herself, and he did not want to turn every difficult exchange into another battle between brothers. He listened as Harry pressed harder. He watched his wife remain composed, even when the accusation became more personal. But restraint had a limit, and the moment Harry stopped questioning her decision and began questioning her motives, something inside the future king changed. Harry leaned into the question that broke the balance. Had Catherine ever genuinely intended to help repair the relationship? She recoiled, hurt flashing through her restraint. Before she could fully answer, William rose and stepped between them. "That is enough," he said. "You do not question her integrity in this house." His voice stayed controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Harry turned the accusation toward his brother. He argued that William's intervention proved the larger problem. Nobody was allowed to speak openly once the conversation became uncomfortable. The prince answered that openness did not mean permission to corner his wife. His voice rose. Catherine immediately placed a hand on his arm. Catherine wanted one final answer of her own. She told Harry that she had cared about him, and that was exactly why years of accusation had hurt so deeply. But she would not accept responsibility for repairing a relationship only the two brothers could repair. Harry fell silent. William did too. Charles finally stood. The king had listened long enough. He asked Catherine to leave the room, then told both sons to remain. But once she stepped away, the argument stopped being about one painful exchange. It became a question of authority. Who had the right to set boundaries inside a family where personal wounds and royal duty could no longer be separated? Charles did not shout. That made the moment heavier. He waited until Catherine had left, looked first at Harry and then at William, and spoke with the exhaustion of a father who understood that another family evening had become a battlefield. But his message was not neutral. There would be no more confrontations disguised as reconciliation. If this family was going to speak honestly, then every person in the room would have to respect a boundary. Charles understood that authority meant something different inside that room. As sovereign, the monarch who formally represents the crown and stands at the head of the royal institution, he carried constitutional weight. But this was not a constitutional dispute. William could not control Harry's private opinions or words. What the prince could control was access to his wife, his household, and the emotional space surrounding Catherine. That personal boundary now mattered more than rank. The king turned first to Harry. He told his younger son that wanting answers did not give him the right to demand them from Catherine, in a setting where she had never agreed to become the subject of interrogation. Harry tried to explain that he had wanted honesty, not humiliation. Charles did not dismiss the pain behind that argument, but he refused to let pain become permission. The Duke fell quiet. Charles then faced William. Protecting Catherine, he said, could not become an excuse to close every door forever. The future king stiffened at that. He disliked the suggestion that his loyalty to his wife might harden into permanent distance from his brother. Still, William did not interrupt. He listened because the warning cut in two directions. Harry had crossed a line, but William could not build a wall so high that no conversation could ever reach him. The boundary came next. Charles removed his glasses and set them beside him. "Your brother can answer for himself," he told Harry. Then he turned toward William, "And so can you." From that moment, any future attempt at reconciliation would begin directly between the brothers. Catherine would no longer serve as a bridge, messenger, mediator, or witness to grievances that belonged to them. William agreed immediately. His answer revealed exactly what mattered most. He was willing to face Harry, argue with him, even hear painful accusations, but Catherine would remain outside that conflict. Harry did not answer so quickly. He looked toward the space she had left and hesitated. That silence changed everything. The decision sounded simple: keep Catherine out of the brothers' conflict. But once the boundary was spoken aloud, the cost of crossing it became immediate, and Harry suddenly found himself facing the consequences of what had happened. Catherine did not leave the gathering in anger. She left exhausted. That distinction mattered. Behind the closed door, William and Harry were still arguing over years of pain, but she had reached a different conclusion. She would no longer allow herself to become the emotional territory on which two brothers fought. The confrontation had hurt her, yet it had also clarified something she had resisted saying for years. She was finished being placed in the middle. Catherine moved into a quieter room while Charles remained with his sons. She did not ask the king to remove Harry, and she did not send for William. The monarch was still trying to contain the damage, while the brothers faced the consequences of what had happened. Elsewhere, the planned dinner quietly collapsed. Staff were told the evening would end early, conversations faded, and the fragile attempt at family normality disappeared almost instantly. Catherine sat alone for several minutes. She removed a bracelet, placed it beside her, then pressed her hands together, as though forcing herself to stay steady. Hurt had replaced anger. When William finally entered, she looked at him and admitted that sadness was stronger than fury. The prince apologized for persuading her to attend. He believed he had promised safety and failed to provide it. William expected blame. Catherine gave him none. She told him the confrontation had exposed something that could no longer remain hidden. She had spent too long being treated as part of a dispute that belonged to two brothers. Necessary family occasions would still be handled with civility. Harry would receive courtesy, but she would not participate in another private discussion designed to make her explain, defend, or interpret William's relationship with him. Catherine then turned the responsibility back where she believed it belonged. If anything was ever going to change, she told William, he and Harry had to stop using other relatives as evidence against each other. The future king listened carefully. He told her he would speak to his brother again, but this time there would be no intermediary, no protective buffer, and no attempt to make Catherine carry any part of the argument. Harry made the next move before the night ended. Through Charles, he asked for 10 minutes alone with William. No king, no Catherine, no aides, just the two of them. For the first time that evening, the next conversation would contain no shield, no mediator, and no one else to blame. Just two brothers, and the history they had spent years carrying into every room. When William entered the smaller room, Harry was already waiting. There was no father between them, no Catherine to defend, no palace official to control the conversation, and no audience to impress. For 10 minutes, they were not the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex. They were brothers confronting the simplest and hardest truth of the entire evening. Both had spent years believing the other understood exactly why he was angry, when neither had truly listened. Harry wanted the conditions stripped down to almost nothing. No recording, no advisor, no intermediary. William agreed because this was exactly what he had demanded all evening. Direct words between the two people who actually owned the conflict. The Prince of Wales, the title held by the heir to the British throne, carried enormous public weight, but inside that room it meant very little. William was simply a brother trying to protect his family while facing another brother he no longer trusted. William began with Catherine. Whatever anger Harry carried toward him, he said, his wife was permanently outside that argument. There would be no more questions aimed at her, no more attempts to make her explain his choices, and no more pressure placed on her to repair what the brothers had broken. Harry listened without interrupting. For once, he did not defend himself immediately. Harry finally admitted what had driven the confrontation. Catherine's refusal at Windsor had become symbolic in his mind. He knew she had not caused the estrangement, yet losing her support had felt like losing one of the last people he believed might still understand him. I was angry with you, he told William, and I made her answer for it. The admission landed harder than another accusation ever could. William looked down before answering. He told Harry that watching Catherine repeatedly dragged into their conflict had created resentment of his own. Challenging him was one thing. Hurting his wife because she stood beside him was another. That cannot happen again, the future king said. Harry answered that it would not. William offered no instant forgiveness. Trust, he said, could not be rebuilt through one honest conversation after years of damage. But he agreed to something important. Future grievances would come directly to him, not through Catherine, not through Charles, not through anyone else. Harry stood first. There was no embrace and no dramatic promise of reconciliation. He simply extended his hand. William hesitated, then took it. Inside that room, the brothers achieved something modest but real, a boundary. Outside it, however, whispers about the gathering were already beginning to shape an entirely different story. By morning, the private gathering was private in name only. The public did not hear the careful distinctions made behind closed doors. They saw one story. Harry had confronted Catherine, William had stepped in, and an evening designed to ease family tensions had nearly collapsed. Yet one image captured the mood better than any headline. A photograph of William and Catherine leaving together, their expressions controlled, while Harry departed separately minutes later. William quickly became the center of public interpretation. Many saw the prince as a husband who had finally drawn a firm line around Catherine after years of tension. Others saw something darker, evidence that the relationship between the brothers remained dangerously fragile. The palace issued no detailed explanation. That silence mattered because Buckingham Palace, the monarch's principal official residence and administrative base, normally speaks with carefully chosen words when family controversy threatens to overwhelm royal business. Harry faced a harsher problem. His reason for confronting Catherine, the need for direct answers after years of resentment, was almost completely buried beneath the simple fact that he had challenged her personally. The Duke's later admission to William remained private. The public did not know that he had acknowledged crossing a line, nor that the brothers had ended their conversation with a restrained agreement rather than another explosion. One newspaper transformed the entire episode into a single word. Its morning front page carried the departure photograph beneath the headline, "Enough." Television coverage repeated the same framing, focusing on William's protective stance and Catherine's controlled expression. The princess said nothing publicly. Her silence created its own message, while the future king's intervention was debated as both protection and proof of deeper family fracture. Crowds outside Windsor added another layer. Visitors gathered near the castle barriers. Photographers waited for movement, and conversations about the confrontation spread through the afternoon. Windsor Castle, the historic royal residence closely associated with private family life as well as official duty, had suddenly become the symbolic center of another royal drama. One person held a handwritten sign carrying two simple words, "Family first." William and Catherine remained together as they departed, while Harry left separately later, subdued and alone. The contrast became the image people remembered. Yet the image concealed the most important truth. Catherine had stepped out of the brothers' dispute. Harry had admitted that he had crossed a boundary. William had agreed that future grievances would come directly to him. The headlines described anger. The photographs showed division. But the true meaning of the night would not be found outside the gates. It would be found in what each person chose to do after the confrontation was over. In the end, William losing patience was not the moment the family finally broke. It was the moment one damaging pattern was forced to stop. Harry had confronted Catherine because he still carried resentment from an old wound. Catherine refused to continue carrying responsibility for a conflict that was never hers to solve. And William, after years of watching those worlds collide, finally drew the line that everyone had avoided drawing clearly enough before. Catherine made her position permanent. She would remain civil to Harry when family duty required it, but she would no longer serve as his mediator, defender, accuser, or bridge to William. The prince understood why that mattered. His wife had spent too long carrying emotional weight that belonged to two brothers. Harry also understood the change. If he wanted answers from William, he would have to ask him directly rather than reaching through someone else. Harry's deepest realization was painful, because it forced him to separate hurt from responsibility. His anger had been real, but that did not mean Catherine had caused the decisions he resented. By turning her into a symbol of everything he had lost, the Duke had asked her to answer for wounds she could never fully repair. William saw something equally difficult. Protecting Catherine could not mean avoiding his brother forever. Charles had hoped the gathering would produce warmth. Instead, the king watched it produce boundaries. That outcome was harsher, but perhaps more useful. Direct communication replaced emotional messengers. Clear limits replaced uncomfortable silence. Reconciliation, the rebuilding of trust after a serious conflict, would no longer mean forcing one relative to carry another person's pain. Catherine became the quiet turning point, without asking to be one. By stepping away, she removed the buffer both brothers had relied upon. Harry could no longer direct his frustration through her. William could no longer protect himself from difficult conversations by keeping everyone at a distance. The conflict finally belonged to the men who had created it. William returned to Catherine before the night ended. He told her that Harry had admitted crossing a line. She closed her eyes briefly, then asked only, "Did you speak to each other?" The future king answered yes. She took his hand. The gathering began as an attempt to repair a royal family and nearly tore open its oldest wounds. Yet one truth survived the damage. Catherine would no longer carry the brothers' conflict. Harry would answer for his own anger, and William would face him directly. The peace was imperfect, but the responsibility was finally where it belonged. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.